You may let everybody in, Sarah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and open it up. Hey there. Make sure we got everybody in. Thank you for joining today's meeting. So this is the first of a three-part kind of series. As we go through the on-ramping process with BEAD, we here at GTA want to be support. We've got our consultants with us today, RSM. Amanda will be reviewing and going over a couple different details this morning. Of course, like all meetings, we will provide a copy of today's webinar on our website for you to share if you want to, for you to go back and reference. If we see any AI bots, we will kind of kick those out, but you are welcome to reference back to this video after the fact. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Let's let Amanda get through the bulk of her presentation before we start with those. And then as a reminder, like I said, this is just a first of three. We're going to start kind of broad and then get a little bit more in depth. So if you have some real in-depth questions, there's a chance that we're addressing those later on, but certainly let us know about that as well. From there, I will kick it over to Amanda.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. So again, today is our BEAD sub-recipient onboarding webinar. Like Sarah said, this is the first of a couple different ones we're going to have. So we'll talk through what some of those are going to look like, and we are going to touch on some of that information just very briefly today, and I'll highlight that for you if it's anything that we are going to explain in more detail or further on our later sessions. But I'm going to go ahead and dive in and share my screen and slides, and these slides will be available to you later for your reference as well. All right. So again, today is our BEAD subrecipient onboarding webinar for our preliminarily selected awardees. Just to walk through our agenda for today, we're going to have an introduction. We're going to talk through our objectives for today's webinar. We're going to identify our next steps, and this is going to be kind of the bulk of what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to go in depth on any of the processes or compliance and monitoring or anything like that. We're going to mainly be talking about exactly what your next steps are as far as signing terms and conditions and those immediate tasks thereafter. We're going to do a very brief NEPA and NHPA recall since we've already had that webinar. And then we're going to talk over some program requirements and then have a Q&A session at the end. So I am your presenter for today. My name is Amanda Skelton. I am a supervisor in our risk consulting practice for government services at RSM. Some of you may be familiar with me from my time at the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, and I do have extensive knowledge in grants management administration, and I have been very lucky to be on the Georgia BEAD project since its inception. All right, so these are our three objectives for today's webinar. First, we're going to identify our next steps for post-award. These are going to include some key actions to be taken prior to grant implementation. Next, we're going to provide an overview of how to locate, interpret, and utilize some grant award required documents and any resources that are available to support program implementation. And third, we're going to highlight subgrantee responsibilities under federal and state requirements to maintain compliance throughout the grant lifecycle. And right here, I'll go ahead and mention that one of our subsequent webinars later this week is going to be compliance and monitoring. So we will go in depth over processes, requirements, et cetera, for the entire compliance and monitoring process as well. All right, this is a great BEAD program timeline that we thought might be helpful to you guys. There's a lot of information on this slide, but if you'll focus on this green highlighted pre-award technical assistance and the gold star here, that's where we're currently sitting. So try to focus on this first section here, and everything kind of towards the right side of the slide you can kind of refer to later, or take a look at whenever you get further on down the line. But right now we're looking at this pre-award technical assistance time period, where we're doing our onboarding webinars as we are today. We're going to be doing that letter of credit and performance bond collection, as well as the collection of those cybersecurity and cyber supply chain plans. And then we are working through that risk assessment, which you guys have already submitted your completed questionnaires for. And then immediately following, or at the same time of award, we're going to have award notification, and then a checklist distribution of those post-award requirements we're going to be talking about today. Your terms and conditions, state accounting office supplier management form, and W-9. Those are forms that you're going to be required to complete that we'll talk about. And then scoring for the risk assessment, which will help us create your monitoring plan for the performance period. All right, so this slide talks about what our 7 main items are for our post-award checklist. So these are things and requirements that you want to focus on right now or right around the time of your award. So first, of course, is those terms and conditions and executing those for the grant award when those become available to you. Second is going to be providing that documentation for your letter of credit or performance bond, whichever is applicable to your project or projects. Third is going to be those cybersecurity and cyber supply chain risk management plans. 4 is your environmental and historic preservation steps. 5, your supplier management form and W-9, which will have to go to the state accounting office. 6, your final budget and equipment list. And then 7, access to the Georgia Grants portal. So as noted here at the top of the slide, all subrecipients must complete these tasks prior to proceeding to the approved status. And what that means, you'll see whenever you do have access, or if you already do have access to the Georgia Grants portal for other awards, in order to start submitting payment requests, your award does have to be moved to that approved status. So all of these steps do have to be completed before you can start submitting any of those payment requests or move forward. All right, so jumping right on to number 1, those grant award terms and conditions. So of course, you'll often hear us refer to these as the T's and C's, but this is an agreement outlining the terms of your award, and that is forthcoming. Those have not been sent out at this time, but this document will need to be signed by an authorized official that's able to accept the conditions of your award legally. The agreement is going to be sent to the contacts list on your application, or who we have on file currently, in the weeks following the award announcements, and is going to come from this email address listed here, which is adobesign@adobesign.com. So this is an email that tends to get caught in spam filters. So whenever you've been made aware that those have been sent out, if you don't see those in your inbox, feel free to reach out to GTA at this email address listed here, which is broadband@gta.ga.gov, if you have any questions or are having any trouble locating those. And then awardees are going to have 14 days to execute those terms and conditions once those are sent out. All right, our next requirement is going to be that letter of credit and performance bond documentation. So subrecipients should submit the following documents via email to both addresses listed below. That's going to be GTA's email listed here, and then our gabead@rsmus.com email address. So for those projects utilizing a letter of credit, you're going to submit 2 things: the copy of the letter of credit, which is no less than 25% of that award amount, as well as that opinion letter from legal counsel. If you're utilizing a performance bond for your project or projects, you're going to submit a copy of that performance bond, no less than 100% of the award amount. Very similar for your cybersecurity and supply chain risk management plans. Those are also going to come to those same email addresses noted here, the broadband@gta.ga.gov, as well as gabead@rsmus.com. And then there's some notes here on those requirements, which you're probably all already aware of and familiar with. All right, after executing your terms and conditions, GTA is going to schedule a kickoff meeting with each subrecipient. During this kickoff meeting, you're going to review required post-award tasks, deadlines, and any other outstanding items necessary. And during this call, you are encouraged to ask questions related to the compliance and monitoring and any requirements for this program. And just to note, I know you guys have already been made aware that you're going to have EHP one-on-one calls. So this is going to be separate and in addition to those calls. So just be aware that those are both things that are going to be forthcoming to help you guys. All right, let's talk about your budget and equipment list. So one of our subsequent webinars, which I believe this one will be next week, is going to talk more in detail about our budget and equipment list process. But we did want to make you aware, since this is one of the onboarding requirements, but subrecipients are required to provide a final budget, which is going to be reviewed by GTA and approved by GTA. And this is going to identify all costs associated with the project, and that's going to include your awarded funds as well as your match funds. And granular details should be provided on this detailed budget worksheet. A narrative should also be provided to explain how each line item in the worksheet corresponds to the project. And then what you see here is just a brief snip of what that worksheet looks like. So you'll have your grantee and project specific information at the top, and then you will roll through throughout the spreadsheet each category for those costs and itemize those as necessary. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the Georgia Grants portal. Some of you may be very familiar with the portal already, but in case you aren't, we do have a couple slides to walk you through obtaining that access and also setting up additional users access. So this slide here walks you through step by step exactly what needs to be done to set up yourself as a user once those terms and conditions are signed. You're going to receive an email from the email address listed here at the top, that grantcaremanager@opb.georgia.gov. And the subject line of that email is going to say, "Welcome to the Georgia Grants Portal, action required." Once you receive that, you can come back to this slide and walk through each of these steps to get yourself set up with access to that portal. Once you have access to the portal, you can then come to this slide and walk through these 4 steps to provide access to any additional users that you want to have access to your account in the portal. And then just a brief retouch or recall on the EHP process. So GTA did host an EHP initial overview webinar on January 6th of this year, where technical assistance and guidance was provided to preliminary subrecipients. Some of the following items were some key takeaways. So environmental and permitting key terms were defined. Limited permissible activities prior to the completion of the environmental review and permitting process were discussed. Varying types of permits that may be required were outlined. There was discussion about the Appiate tool and how subgrantees will leverage that to identify permits. And then the questionnaire completion and documentation upload for ESAP verification and tracking was discussed. And then for immediate next steps for EHP, GTA is going to coordinate those EHP one-on-one calls to support successful NEPA and NHPA project implementation. And for those key next steps, again, just work with coordinating those calls with GTA as they reach out to you for those. And then in preparation for those one-on-one meetings, subrecipients should be conducting their own clash detection. All right, now we're going to highlight just a couple of BEAD program specific requirements. So we're going to talk about those limited permissible activities again briefly. So Georgia's BEAD program funds a wide range of broadband activities. And regarding last mile broadband deployment projects, GTA will allow limited permissible activities under NEPA to proceed. using award funds prior to the completion of the EHP review process. So those 7 specified activities are listed here. Those are pre-construction planning, including collecting information necessary to complete environmental reviews, applications for environmental permits. Number 3, studies including but not limited to environmental assessments, wetland delineations, biological assessments, archaeological surveys, and other environmental reviews and analyses. Number 4, administrative costs. Number 5, pre-award application costs. Number 6, activities supporting consultations required under NHPA, Endangered Species Act, and the Clean Water Act. And then last, number 7, limited preliminary procurement, including purchase or lease of equipment, entering into binding contracts to do so, or the purchase of applicable or conditional insurance, and or funds used to secure land or building leases, including right-of-way easements. 2 special notes down here at the bottom I want to highlight. First, subrecipients that undertake unauthorized project activities in contravention of this information do so at their own risk and may face the obligation of funding. And then second, subrecipients that incur costs prior to execution of final award agreement proceed at their own risk and may face rejection if deemed unallowable. And moving on to eligible expenses. So these are specified through NTIA's BEAD NOFO. And just to run through these real quickly, I'm sure you're all very familiar with these. Number 1, construction, improvement, and or acquisition of facilities and telecom equipment required to provide qualifying broadband service. This can include infrastructure for backhaul, middle and last mile networks, as well as multi-tenant buildings. Number 2, long-term leases for terms greater than 1 year for facilities required to provide qualifying broadband service, including indefeasible right-of-use agreements. Number 3, deployment of internet and Wi-Fi infrastructure with an eligible multifamily residential building. 4, engineering design, permitting, and work related to environmental, historical, and cultural reviews. 5, personnel costs, including salaries and fringe benefits for staff and consultants, providing services directly connected to the implementation of the BEAD program. This can include project managers, program directors, and subject matter experts. Number 6, network software upgrades, including but not limited to cybersecurity solutions. 7, training for cybersecurity professionals who will be working on BEAD-funded networks. And lastly, number 8, workforce development, including registered apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships and community college and vocational training for broadband-related occupations to support deployment, maintenance, and upgrades. And since we talked about eligible expenses, we have to talk about unallowable expenses. So again, as outlined in NTIA's BEAD NOFO, or that Notice of Funding Opportunity document, the following costs are specified as prohibited for the BEAD program. Here at the top, we have prohibition on use of grant funds for covered communications equipment or services under the Secure and Trusted Communication Network Act. Second is prohibition on profit and fees. And then lastly, prohibition on use of grant funds to support or oppose collective bargaining. And then we will touch on eligible sources of match. We will also talk more about match in our compliance and monitoring webinar. Funds from other federal programs generally may not be used as match funds. However, IIJA expressly provides that matching funds for the BEAD program may come from a federal regional commission or authority, or from funds to the extent permitted by law that were provided to an eligible entity or a subgrantee for the purpose of deploying broadband services under any of the following. So first, we have the Families First Coronavirus Response Act from 2020. Second, we have Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Secures Act of 2020. This is also known as the CARES Act. Third, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, or the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which we all know as ARPA. And lastly, loan funding issued through a federal agency, such as through the USDA's Reconnect program, may also be used as match funding. And a brief note on in-kind match. Again, we will discuss this more at length on our compliance and monitoring webinar. In-kind match is also known as an in-kind contribution, and it's a non-cash donation, typically of property, goods, or services that can benefit a federally assisted project. These can count towards satisfying the non-federal match requirement, but it does have to meet certain criteria. In-kind contributions must be allowable and allocable project expenses and may come from a third party. So just to touch on these specific requirements here on the right-hand side, GTA is required to maintain thorough documentation to justify the valuation of any in-kind property and services contributed toward meeting BEAD's match requirements. So prospective subrecipients will need to provide support. This documentation must clearly show the assigned how the assigned value was determined by the subrecipient, and records should include details on the contribution, the valuation method used, and the donation terms to support the amount claimed as matching funds for the project. And then the last note here, the contribution should be both relevant and necessary for the project. The valuation methodology and supporting documentation should reflect actual market conditions. And briefly touching on BEAD program reporting, this is another item we're going to cover more in detail on our compliance and monitoring webinar. But just to make you all aware, GTA will require quarterly reports for the BEAD program. NTIA's overall BEAD requirements is that reporting is provided on a semi-annual basis. But for those of you who are familiar with other broadband programs that GTA operates under, their reports are required quarterly, so keeping all of those programs on the same cadence will help subrecipients as well as GTA. So those are going to be every quarter throughout the duration of the project. And again, we will talk more at length about exactly when those will be, what that's going to look like, and those requirements on our compliance and monitoring webinar. And to touch briefly on BABA, again, BABA is another item we're going to talk about on our compliance and monitoring webinar, but just to put it on your radar, that compliance with the Build America, Buy America Act is required for the BEAD program. GTA is committed to ensuring that subgrantees comply with BABA requirements. So there's some linked documentation here at the top of the slide directly from NTIA. But prior to contract execution, subrecipients must submit a final budget that includes a detailed list of vendors and a comprehensive list of materials and equipment to be purchased for the project. That's what I touched on earlier with that final budget, which we're going to have a separate webinar and go into much more detail about that. But then also be able to certify that your entity understands and will comply with the following BABA requirements. Requirement that all iron steel manufactured products and construction materials used in the project or other eligible activities are produced in the U.S. unless a waiver is granted. Second, in determining whether a product is produced in America, subrecipients must comply with definitions listed here, which provides that a manufactured product is considered produced in the U.S. if the product was manufactured and the cost of components of the manufactured product are mined, produced, or manufactured in the U.S. greater than 55% of the total cost of all components of the manufactured product, unless another standard for determining the minimum amount of domestic content of the manufactured product has been established under applicable law or regulation. And then number 3, in addition to the provisions above, subgrantees may not use BEAD funding to purchase or support any covered communications equipment or service as defined in Section 9 of the Secure and Trusted Communication Network Act of 2019. And then the last bullet here, the Infrastructure Act expressly prohibits subgrantees from using BEAD funding to purchase or support fiber optic cable and optical transmission equipment manufactured in the People's Republic of China, unless a waiver of this requirement is received from the Assistant Secretary. All right, this slide here, we have some resources listed for you. The top row of resources are going to be Georgia-specific resources, such as the BEAD Compliance and Monitoring Plan, the final proposal, as well as FAQs. And then your lower line is going to be NTIA-specific guidance, such as the NOFO, restructuring policy notice, and NTIA's BEAD FAQs. And then our last slide here is just those same emails for contact that you've seen before. If you need to reach our RSM team, that email address is gabead@rsmus.com. And then the GTAB team is broadband@gta.gov. And that's it. GTA, did you guys have anything else you wanted to share before we jump over to a Q&A session?
Nothing major to update on our end. I spoke to our federal program officer last Friday. We are on the final desk for NIST approval, so we should be getting that letter this week. From there, as we kind of mentioned before, we will have our legal team review terms and conditions, and then we will send all that information with the updated terms and conditions for our subgrantees out to you guys. If you have any questions about that in the interim, certainly reach out to us or those email addresses provided, I think on the previous slide. With that, we can open up for questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or to raise your hand and we'll go from there.
And if you guys don't mind, try to keep your questions for today's webinar specific to those immediate required tasks and onboarding things, since we do have other webinars coming up that are going to cover things such as budget processes and compliance and monitoring.
Do have one in the chat from Laura. What does the environmental and historic preservation step entail? The materials breakout will be challenging to provide before grant execution, as finalized design routes are still being worked on. Final design routes require boots on the ground and environmental review, which take time.
Yeah, I was looking to see if Carolyn from our team was on. I know she was earlier, but she may have had to drop.
Yes, she had to drop for another call. Sorry.
Worries. Yeah, I don't know, Sarah, if you want to try to answer that.
Let's circle up with Carolyn. I think I want to make sure that we get those details correct and let the pro respond. So Laura, I will add that to my list of things to follow up with and we'll get back to you.
I'm happy to answer some of it, and we can give them a more comprehensive response later.
Okay.
But essentially, we'll be sending out, collecting some information regarding your project. We'll be collecting those final design routes, final line work, running them to see what environmental triggers essentially they're clashing up against and what permits are going to be required. And there'll also be documentation need to be completed for work with Georgia's State Historic Preservation Office and what requirements will, and approvals are going to be needed from them. And then we'll start using some of that information and entering into NTIA's ESAP tool, which again will show some of the permits that will be required. So it's just going to be a lot of documentation, and part of that's going to be getting your final line work and drawings done. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, and we will, like I said, we will circle back on that as well and get that back to you in writing, Lara. Next one, real quick, Merv, I saw, will you send out the slides with the email contacts for LOC, etc.? Absolutely, we can get those to you we should be able to do that by end of day, but I can definitely get those email contacts to you as well. And anytime you have a question and you're not sure where to send them, if you want to send them to those 2 accounts, somebody, that will get all eyes on it, and it will make sure we get it to the right person for response. Next one is you stated that matching funds could include loans funded through the Reconnect program. Can Reconnect matching funds be used as the BEAD matching funds where it is integral to the BEAD project?
Yes. So that was one of the programs that was specifically listed. So yes.
Next one is, can the overall budget be increased given the expansive EHP requirements, which may not have been budgeted for originally?
And I'm going to make sure I understand the way that's worded. So overall budget, so like your award amount is not going to be increased. However, if, and correct me, this is from Frankie, so chime in if I explain this and it's not answering your question, but if you submit a budget and you have a certain amount allotted to that process, but you start going and that budget gets reviewed and approved and it's in place and you're working through the project and you see that that amount is not going to cover what you had allotted for that EHP process, you can submit a budget adjustment request to be reviewed and approved by the GTA team for things along those lines. So that is one of the processes we'll talk about on the budget webinar, but that absolutely is something that would be available.
Where on the GTA website will the recording be posted? So on the GTA website, there's a specific tab for broadband, and then from there, BEAD. It will be posted there, and it should be relatively towards the top of the page. You'll see our previous webinars there as well. That's where we're kind of gonna, or William just threw it up there as well. That's where we'll be posting any of these webinars and just updated information. It's where you can find, I believe, our FAQs as well. So use that source or use that site as a resource, and we'll make sure it's maintained for you guys. Any other questions? All right, going once, going twice. All right, well, we appreciate you guys for attending today, even though it was mandatory. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Amanda, for presenting this information. And if you guys have any follow-ups, like I said, we're happy to answer them. We'll see you at the next webinar. Have a nice afternoon.